it's important to find life meaning, and it takes courage to do that. And courage comes from meaning. If something's meaningful, some things that seemed huge obstacles become no more than speed bumps if you know what you're doing to get there is really meaningful. So the message is pretty much all the same, but it's all tied to an adventure story.
Welcome back to the Running Wine Mom podcast. I'm your host, Samantha Cieslinski, aka the Running Wine Mom. Today's guest is someone whose life could fill 10 lifetimes, and I am not exaggerating. John Graham has served as a U.S. diplomat in war zones, climbed Denali's treacherous North Wall, and now leads the Giraffe Heroes Project, spotlighting people around the world who stick their necks out for the greater good. He's been on the front lines of history, risked everything on an icy cliff, and spent decades asking one big question: what does courage really look like? We talk about the moments that defined him, the people who inspired him, and the lessons he's still learning. So pour a glass, lace up your running shoes, or settle into whatever space you're in right now. This conversation is one you won't want to miss. So without further ado, let's welcome John. Welcome, John.
Hey, glad to be here, Sam. Thanks very much.
Yes, I'm excited for everyone to learn all of the wonderful and adventurous things that you have done in your life so far. However, before we start, to start each episode, we have our wine, and win of the week segment. This is where we share our favorite bottle of wine, vent about something that's been bothering us, and celebrate our recent victories. So grab a glass, take a deep breath, and let's get started. So, John, what is your drinking wine of the week?
You know, I always prefer a Viognier. It's a white wine with a little sharp flavor to it, and it's not easy to get, but Trader Joe's sometimes has it. So yeah, that's my favorite.
I do like that one. We are going into our white wine drinking season. We're still on red a little bit in my house because it's still been so cold. So I can't wait to be drinking the white, and I will add that to my list.
Great, yeah.
What is your wine? Your
My son-in-law had a health scare in Sweden, and he's just now recovering. So I'm still thinking about him and wishing him well. He's doing some rehab. He had some heart surgery, so yeah, that's been bothering me.
well,
Other than that, the sun is out. It's now up to 60 degrees out here in the Pacific Northwest, so it's pretty hard to be bothered. Of course, I'm bothered by our national politics. I'm no friend of Donald Trump. But on the other hand, I'm a graduate of Harvard, so I'm really pleased that my alma mater is sticking its own neck out and telling him he can take his demands and stick them where the sun doesn't shine. So that's making me happy.
so that is your win of the week then.
Yes, hooray.
How wonderful that, yeah, there's so much. I feel like that's all we've been surrounded by the last, well, 6 months, but more than that, really. It's just been a huge shift, per se. So I always like to ask my guests, what is one significant challenge you've successfully navigated, shaping your journey to where you are today?
Gosh, there were so many of them. And I suppose the biggest turning point and the biggest challenge in many ways was a battle in Vietnam some decades ago, where I really had to. It wasn't a question of physically surviving the battle, which obviously I did. It was at reshaping my whole life. Up to a certain point in my life, I was very selfish, to be blunt. Everything was about me. I went to Vietnam as a volunteer just for the adventure of it, because that's who I was. I didn't really give a damn about the war or about other people. And in the middle of this battle, it all changed. It all came down on my head how shallow my life was. And from that point on, I had to struggle out of a deep hole, psychic hole, if you will. So it was the worst point in my life, but it was also a crucial turning point.
Yeah. And this time last year, I read the book, The Women by Kristen Hanna, which gave a lot of the female perspective in Vietnam of the nurses. And I learned a lot more, obviously I learned in high school about it, but it was really insightful to hear about all of the war over there and how many things I didn't know about it, really. So the Running Wine Mom, we have to talk a little fitness. What's your favorite way to stay active?
Ah, I'm 82 now, and so I can't do what I used to do, which is run marathons, climb big steep mountains, et cetera, et cetera. But I stay active by walking. I can't
Yeah.
you know. So that's what you have to do, especially when you're 82. I mean, you can't not exercise because you lose whatever fitness you have left very quickly. So staying fit is really important to me, and I do the best I can and have fun doing it.
So, as someone who is 82, what advice would you give to people who are in their 30s and 40s right now for fitness and ways to stay a healthy 82-year-old?
Huh. Well, the physical part of it is pretty obvious. I don't have anything there to add that others haven't already said before. And stay active, eat reasonably well, whatever. I like a glass or two of wine with a meal, and if that's bad for me, well, I just don't give a damn. Maybe I won't live to be 103 or something. So the physical part of it, I don't have anything more to add than most sensible people do. Is just eat well and exercise. Surround yourself with as many friends as you have. I have also have the great good fortune to have a wonderful partner, 44 years, and that's also important. I think it adds years to your life. So I lead a pretty copacetic existence. I live in a house on a rural area in Whidbey Island, Washington State. I can't even see another house from my house. And the nearest town has only got 800 people in it, so it's a nice life. And I'm also very active, and not only doing podcasts like this, but I write and I blog. I do all kinds of stuff to stay active and keep my mind active. So that's important too. All that said, there's something even more important, I think, that's really important to keep someone going when you get to be my age or younger. And that's to always stay attuned to the need for personal meaning in your life. That is to say, what is it that you're doing that is in sync with your deepest values and priorities? I think that's absolutely crucial. I know too many people who not only do they get sick, but they get very disgruntled and unhappy because they're doing stuff that isn't meaningful. They find out after all that, for example, amassing money and power doesn't quite do it. I mean, there's a time when there's a certain emptiness. You have to find what makes your life full. And my experience has been, and also through the nonprofit that I help run, you mentioned it briefly, the Giraffe Heroes Project, and the people that we honor, is that the most reliable source of meaning for anybody, I think it's been true since the Neanderthals, is some kind of service, some kind of giving back. So I'm finding that one of the best ways to stay motivated and alive and moving forward, especially into senior years, is to keep doing things that are meaningful to you, which is some kind of service. And the service can be anything. It could be simply being a great granddad to your grandchildren. It could be taking on some political tasks, for example. God knows there's plenty of threats to our communities in the country now. Well, do something about it. Join a demonstration, write letters, call your congress people, whatever. Stay active. And that's also extremely important. But do something that's meaningful. That's the key. And I keep saying that. And every speech I give, every podcast I give, I sound like a broken record. You know, the key thing is finding meaning, and that takes courage. And that's where the two are linked. It takes courage sometimes to do what's meaningful to you because other people are telling you to sit down and shut up, or there are rules or whatever, or it's hard, or it's going to cost money, or it could be physically dangerous in some cases, but you got to keep doing it. And that's absolutely.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I think that is wonderful to hear that you have that perspective and that it's still important at 82 because I think that sometimes I'm in my upper 30s and I sometimes feel that there's this rush to have everything figured out now and that like at some point the maybe motivation will stop to be, I teach as well, so I definitely do service to high school students and give back in that way with advocacy. And so it's really nice to hear that it's just going to keep going through life if that's the outlook we have that I have kind of now.
Well, I'm a slow learner, Samantha, and I was your age before I finally got it. I mean, like I said, the whole first part of my life was very selfish. It was one adventure after the other, and I kept walking away from all of them. So I decided that I was indestructible. So I would climb. Each mountain was more difficult and dangerous than the one before, or I walked through bullets and bombs and in revolutions and wars and stuff, and that's all that mattered to me. But and I finally began to figure it out that needed to change. So yeah, it's important. One of the things I want to mention this now because one of the things I started doing about half a year ago was doing some short form videos on TikTok.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and you can find them all. They're all under the package called Badass Granddad. Badass, all one word. Granddad with two D's in the middle, and each one is 3 minutes long, and they're all aimed at people half my age. In other words, people that could be my grandchildren. And they all have start with a minute and a half or so of some wild ass adventure I've done, which brings people to the, you know how it is with young people. They got about 12
Yeah.
seconds on their phone, right? So these
Yeah.
short videos to be viewed on a phone, and I get people's attention by telling these adventure stories, whether it's a war, a revolution, a mountain climb, whatever. And then about the halfway point, I'll segue into some kind of life lesson attuned to that adventure story. The life lesson might be on courage or persistence or honesty or something like that. But at that point, I've got my audience mostly hooked because I've got this adventure story. In the beginning, they might think, "Who is this old fart?" But then they realize that I've done more difficult and dangerous things than they'll ever do, and so they listen. But I'm able to get my messages across, which are always pretty much the same. It's important to find life meaning, and it takes courage to do that. And courage comes from meaning. If something's meaningful, some things that seemed huge obstacles become no more than speed bumps if you know what you're doing to get there is really meaningful. So the message is pretty much all the same, but it's all tied to an adventure story. So I urge your listeners, viewers, to use the search box on TikTok and look for
Yeah.
Badass Granddad. I'm having great fun doing it. It makes me feel.
I will definitely link it. That's so fun. I love that for you. So we are going to get into your adventures and all that you do. As I said, your life reads like an adventure novel. But if I met you at a neighborhood barbecue, how would you kind of introduce yourself? How do you kind of wrap all of that up into just randomly meeting someone?
Randomly meeting someone. I don't know if I'd say this in the very first word, but I would quickly ask who the other person is because I think that's the biggest mistake people make in making new acquaintances, especially if I may say so, male people. We like to talk about ourselves. And so I would find it as quickly as I could to ask who people are because I'm interested in who people are, and I find that everybody is on this search for meaning. So sometimes the conversation edges over in that direction, even in a 5 minute at a barbecue, as you suggest. And then if I get to know someone a little bit, maybe 5 minutes into the barbecue, I will offer that I'm lucky to be alive, and that always it always pulls them forward. Well, what do you mean? You're lucky to be alive.
What do you mean?
I can say a little bit about myself without going overboard because as you pointed out, I've got an innumerable number of stories, and I'm a pretty interesting person. So I will talk about that. But again, in meeting people, you just can't talk about yourself. So I will tell a story, and then I'll wait for a reaction, and try to move it on from there. Of course.
I love that. So let's rewind a little bit. You said when you were a kid or when you were younger, you were a little selfish. But what were the early signs you become someone who literally sticks their neck out for others?
Ah, well, the last two words are important for others. When did I first start sticking my neck out? Well, I stuck it out for myself for like 20 years. First thing I did was get a job working as a crewman on a freighter, and when I was just 17 years old. And those were in the days before container ships. So freighters were big boats uh, that were crewed by 50 or 60 really tough guys. I got a job on one of these freighters, and the crewman decided very early on, realizing that I'd come from this kind of like very staid, gentle family and a very staid, gentle city where nothing ever happened, and I was going to lead a very stable, gentle life. They decided they needed to teach me life lessons that I would never get anyplace else. And they did. You can imagine at 17 what some of those lessons were in the Far East.
I can't imagine.
I mean, it was barroom brawls and all kinds of stuff, but it really woke me up as to a huge, wide, wonderful world out there. And it was also a way of providing me with some role models because I do a lot of mentoring, especially to young men, not just men, but mostly young men. And I realize that it's just crucial that especially young men have decent role models. Now, I grew up, like I say, in this very quiet town and in a very quiet family. I loved my dad, but he wasn't a good role model for what I needed. I was being bullied by other kids. And so I was looking for a strong father figure, somebody who fought back. And my dad wasn't that kind of guy. He was very gentle, intellectual. He got pushed around always in the community, at work. And so he wasn't the model I looked for. But then I get this job on the cruise ship. And the very first, or maybe it was the second night, second evening on that cruise ship, I'm out on deck, and one of the other crewmen starts making sexual advances to me. Not, I know Another crewman grabs this guy around the neck like this, slams him up against the bulkhead, and there's this magnificent stream of cussing. I never heard cussing like that before. I just stood there in awe. And he slams the guy down on the deck and gives him a final whack. And that evening, I went down in my cabin, and I was so impressed. I went up to the mirror and I grabbed an imaginary foe and fussed at him the way that this guy, his name was Roy, by the way. He was about a 250-pound black guy, and he sort of took me on as my protector. But Roy became my hero. He was everything my father wasn't. I mean, he was big and he's tough and So most of my models for the next 10 years were people like Roy. I mean, the next summer I was hitchhiking in Algeria when there was still a war going on between the French and the rebels, a war of independence in Algeria. And I remember spending an evening with a detachment of French Foreign Legionnaires. Now, the French Foreign Legionnaires were really tough guys, and they were in the Foreign Legion because they were fleeing the law or something. I mean, these were pretty bad dudes, covered with tattoos.
Yeah.
And these guys thought that with a couple of pistols, they could hold off the whole rebel army. Oh, man, they were terrific role models of what a man should. And I was just like Roy. I gained this knowledge of what a role model was. And so all of the things I look for in men and role models were like that. I mean, in movies, it was like John Wayne, or books that I read and everything. And it became clear that I had to become a Roy. I had to become like Foreign Legionnaires. I couldn't be the kid that got kicked around by bullies anymore. And so I set about to fix that, and I did. In college, I ended up rowing crew, and I put on like 35 pounds of muscle, and I was already 6.5 feet tall. So I soon became physically nobody would want to mess with. So that's just furthered my ambitions to be a tough guy in that John Wayne sense, where the models I sought were all men who lived on violence and toughness and never showed their emotion. And I pretty thoroughly hammered like a layer of plywood over my heart, because I had a heart. It was clear from when I was a little kid that I was a very compassionate little boy, but it all got hammered over with this plywood, and I became a John Wayne, or a John Wayne wannabe. And that's what my life was about. And that's why I joined the U.S. Foreign Service, because I figured that's where I could be John Wayne, but I could also get paid for it. So I joined.
There you go.
I mean, I had to do something. I wasn't independently wealthy. And the Foreign Service was great because they didn't send me to some fancy pants embassy in Europe. They sent me to wars and revolutions where bullets were whistling by my head. I was in the middle, for example, of the revolution in Libya when Gaddafi came to power. And I just loved it. Other people in the embassy were freaking out when they saw cars burning in the square, or mobs throwing rocks and stuff. They were freaking out. I just loved it. This is the kind of life I like, because by then I was pretty damn good at taking care of myself. And I had so many adventures, including some mountaineering climbs where I came back unscathed. I was pretty sure I was indestructible, so it was a great life for me. And so
Yeah.
I asked to be sent to the war in Vietnam, and the State Department obliged. And I said, send me to the most dangerous spot you got, and they did. I became advisor to the city of Hue, which was in the very northern part of what was then South Vietnam, just 50 miles short of the demarcation line, the DMZ, but then divided North and South Vietnam. It was a very dangerous place to be. And I was there as a volunteer. I didn't believe in the war. I thought the war was stupid and unwinnable, evil even. But I was there because it was the only war we had, and I wanted to be in a shooting war. Because at that point I was so hooked on adrenaline that the only thing that mattered was the ultimate adventure, which was, dodging bullets, almost getting killed or killing, that kind of violence. It was that kind of a life. And that's where
Yeah.
it brings me up to what I started saying 15 minutes ago. A battle where all of a sudden, in the middle of this battle with the North Vietnamese army only 6 miles away, it looked like I was going to be killed or captured. And I just realized how shallow my life had become, because by then I was a fairly senior guy and I was making
Hmm.
decisions that were life and death decisions for other people. But I was making them in for the most shallow motivations. I just wanted the adventure. And all of a sudden,
Hmm.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that anymore. Luckily, I survived that battle because carrier jets from U.S. carriers off the coast, the sky had finally cleared, and these jets blasted the North Vietnamese army that was surrounding the city, and my life was again saved.
Yeah.
And I stumbled back to California. I got back to California and tried to put my life together. I had what now is called PTSD. I mean, I'd walk on the
Hmm.
shadowy sides of the streets in Palo Alto, California, to avoid sniper fire, terrible nightmares. But mostly the struggle was, what do I do with a life that has become this shallow?
Right.
I got involved then in California with what in those days were called encounter groups. They were just, you got down with 8 or 10 other people, in this case men, and you tried to share your inner feelings as best you could, which was really difficult, but I did it. And it was really important to me because other people begin to tell me that I wasn't a monster. I really wasn't. That buried beneath all this John Wayne veneer and all these war stories was a nice guy, was a compassionate guy, and that I should learn to find myself. I should learn to find my own identity. And it wasn't Roy, the guy on the freighter. It wasn't the French foreign engineers. It wasn't John Wayne. It was me, who at root was a pretty gentle, compassionate human being who for 15 years had lived with that piece of plywood hammered over my heart. Now I needed to rip it off. And so I gradually began to do that. And I discovered immediately that all of a sudden I began to make friends. I became a better father to my 2 children. And I began to realize that I had a certain responsibility, having seen so much war and revolution and pestilence and poverty out in the world, that I had a certain responsibility to use my skills on peace and justice, because I had those
Hmm.
skills, I had the experience, and I could do that. It just never occurred to me to do that before because I was too consumed with my own risk-taking ideology. So I gradually crawled out of that hole. A few years later, for example, I found myself working at the United Nations for the U.S. government,
Wow.
and by then my life had really turned itself around. I really saw myself as an engine for peace and justice, and I went way beyond what my government wanted me to do to fight for peace and justice issues for the poorer countries of Africa and Asia, the so-called third world. And I'm happy, I'm proud to say that I had something significant to do with the ending of apartheid in South Africa. I took some terrific risks to double cross my own government and push my own government and then Europe into supporting an arms embargo, which stopped the flow of guns and military equipment to the white South African police and military, which they
Wow.
were using to kill blacks. And I helped put an end to that. And other things happened as well, where my life had totally turned around. So at a certain point, I realized that my ideals were now outstripping what the State Department could countenance. They were getting really upset with me because I wasn't obeying any. They were moving way too slowly for me, and there was too much
Yeah,
corruption, and there were too many stupid people telling me what to do, and so I quit because I realized I couldn't really save the world the way I wanted to and still work for anybody
right.
else. So I quit, and then that led to a lot more adventures. But that was the key turning point: was leaving the Foreign Service, leaving the United Nations, and launching myself 45 years ago or so as an engine for peace and justice.
And so another thing that you have come to do to help the world become a better place is to work with the Giraffe Heroes Project.
Yeah.
And this project began with Anne Medlock's vision to spotlight unsung heroes. How did you come to join this mission and what convinced you of its significance?
Several answers to that. I left the Foreign Service, right? And so I'm so full of myself. I figure, well, I'll just go out there and write books and give wonderful speeches. This was in the middle of the Cold War. I'll give wonderful speeches on making peace, peacemaking.
Yeah.
And nobody came because I didn't understand that you can't change people's behavior very easily just by preaching at them. So I met
Hmm.
this remarkable woman, Anne Medlock, who was a writer, single mother, writer, and editor living in New York City. I met this woman who who was a natural storyteller. And she shared my aims for peace and justice in the world, but she wasn't knew perfectly well that preaching at people didn't work. Storytelling was what had been working for thousands of years. I mean, people dancing around their campfires, 10,000. If you wanted people to behave with courage, you told them the story of a courageous person. I mean, that's the way it worked.
Hmm.
And she understood
Hmm.
that. So she launched the Giraffe Heroes Project, and its aim was to find people who were sticking their necks out, that is to say, taking risks in order to do something good in the world and solve a problem. Well, the problem could be anything. It could be violence on the streets. It could be poverty and environmental damage or crimes against women or you name it, corruption. She'd find these people, interview them, and then get a movie star or a stage star to do the voiceover. And she would create these stories, 3-4 minute stories on vinyl records. I'm guessing half your audience today doesn't know what a vinyl record is. It gets a
They're
flat,
back. They're back. And
it goes
they're
down to
back
the
in
end
the,
of the cable and sound comes out.
yeah.
She'd create vinyl records and send them to little radio stations all around the country. Or she'd do a paper press releases and faxes. I mean, this is 1981, 82. I mean, that was the technology she had. Uh, but she was unstoppable. She kept doing it. And about that time, I realized that my lectures weren't working very well, and I was also running out of money. And there's a brief interlude here, also that's important to tell, at least in brief. I had run out of money after leaving the United Nations, and a friend of mine suggested that I make money by lecturing on cruise ships. I didn't realize.
Hmm.
But these cruise ships, they hire people like me who had a good gift of gab, and you give a couple of lectures, you get a free trip, and you're paid enormous amounts of money. I got a job on
Love that.
a cruise ship called the Princeton Dam, 1980, going from Vancouver to the Far East on this. By today's standards, it was a small ship, 550
Hmm.
people. And I got to take my then 13-year-old daughter, Mallory, with me. So we set off from Vancouver, and that damn ship, after 3 days in the middle of the North Pacific, 140 miles from the coast of Alaska, burns, fire in the engine room, out of control, and the ship begins to burn and sink just as a typhoon is coming on. So it's pretty.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man, it was difficult. So they sent out the SOS, and at that point, the fire was so extreme, we're all in lifeboats, and the helicopters would fly from shore bases, and they could lift one person at a time out of the lifeboats in a metal chair at the end of a chain, and they'd hoist them up
Oh
into
my
the
God.
helicopter. And then when there were 8 or 10 people in the helicopter, they would take them to the deck of a big oil tanker that had answered the SOS, and it was standing by. So they worked as fast as they can, but the typhoon was bearing down, and after a time, the helicopters couldn't fly anymore. But by then, almost everybody had been rescued. There were only 8 of us left in lifeboat number 2, and the helicopters couldn't fly anymore. And our only hope, imagine the situation. You're in a lifeboat, you're in a typhoon. That is to say that the swells and waves were like 30 feet, which means that the lifeboat was going up and down the length of a 6-story building. The winds were gusting to 60 knots, and it was cold, and you were dying of hypothermia. And your only hope was a Coast Guard cutter, a small ship, which was frantically searching in the storm to find this little lifeboat, this little cockle shell of a lifeboat. I figured we had, because I knew from mountain climbing what hypothermia is, I figured we had only 6 or 7 hours to live before we would die of the cold. But more to the point, it was the fading light, because we had no flares, no lights, no radio in that lifeboat. And visibility was already down to a couple hundred meters, and that was in daylight. And if the Coast Guard cutter didn't find us in daylight, the odds were slim that it would. Once it got dark, our fate was sealed because, like I say, no lights, no flares,
Yeah.
radio, we'd be dead. By morning, only our corpses would be in that boat if we weren't thrown out in the storm. And so it looked like my luck had run out. All of this history of avoiding death and walking away from tough situations, it looked like I was finally going to.
Yeah.
I never forget, talking about turning points. I wasn't a religious person, but I remember looking up into the storm, trying to, quote, pray, although I didn't really know what prayer was. But I remember shouting at whatever it was out there, God or whatever, saying, I don't get it. I mean, here, I understand that the first half of my life was pretty damn selfish and I did a lot of harm. But I've changed. I helped end apartheid. I mean, I'm trying to do some good work. I got some years left. I thought this is what I was supposed to be doing. And now you're snuffing my life out. It doesn't make any sense. And so I got angry. My prayer became an angry. I don't know what the other 7 guys heard. But I heard a voice in that storm, whether it was God or whether it was the gusts of wind, I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. But I heard this voice, and it basically said, "Stop kidding yourself. This is shit, or get off the pot, John. You helped end apartheid. Good for you. And you're pointed toward a life of service, of helping solve tough problems. Or what do? You panic over money, and now you're lecturing on a cruise ship. Pretty copacetic existence. If you get out of this, you'll lecture on another cruise ship. So you got to get serious." Because if you're not serious, you might as well die out here because the rest of your life won't be worth living. On the other hand, if you really commit to the ideals you found at the United Nations and commit to a life of service, well, then you might have a different future. I heard all that, not in so many words, of course, but I heard all that very clearly. And I remember just putting my face up into this wild storm and saying, okay, it's a deal. And that instant, I know this sounds crazy. Most people don't believe it. But in that instant, this Coast Guard cutter, the Boutwell, comes crashing through this wild storm.
Wow.
And I'm rescued. And I never looked back. I kept my promise. But that brings us back to the Giraffe Project and Ann Medlock, because I came back to New York, now a really different person. I was serious. And here was Ann doing the Giraffe Project, and it became the perfect vehicle. And the other part to your question is how to get involved was I fell madly in love with her. And everything she was doing became really important. And she taught me the power of storytelling. So we began working together on the Giraffe Heroes Project a year or 2 after she'd started. And we've done so ever since. We are business partners with the Giraffe Project, and we're husband and wife and best friends now 43, 44 years. And the Giraffe Project has been doing the same thing, only we're doing it in different ways. Back in the day, it was fax machines and vinyl records. Now, of course, we use the latest in social media technology to find people sticking their necks out and telling their stories. And we've now honored about 2,000 people over 42 years.
Wow.
Each one sticking their neck out to make a difference. And they're men or they're women, they're every color in the rainbow, from every place, every walk of life. And that's what we do. We've created a program for schools, going all the way from kindergarten through high school. helping kids build lives as courageous and compassionate citizens. I've written 4 books on themes of courage, service. I used to do a lot of stump speeches. That's before COVID. COVID pretty much shut that down. And now I found I can reach even more people doing things like we're doing right now. I can reach a lot of people on your podcast or other people's podcast or interview shows or my own blog or whatever. So and then there's the badass granddad. I mean, that's been great. I've only been doing it 6 months,
Wow,
and
that's awesome.
I get great feedback from it. So that's what I'm doing now, and that's bringing us up to date. And the Giraffe Project
Wow.
is still booming. Its URL is very simple, just giraffe.org, and anyone can get on it. And all 2,000 stories are available as free downloads. Most of our schools program is available as a free download, plus all the information on what we're doing. Giraffe.
Awesome. Again, I will link all of that. So, in a world where we're often rewarded for playing it safe, how do we raise kids or lead ourselves to be brave in quiet ways or ways that make a difference?
Yeah, just look around, I guess. A lot of people are motivated to do things differently just because things are so bad around them. I mean, look at what's happening right now. A lot of people are threatened by what Trump and Musk are doing, and many of them are not showing courage. But then there's Harvard, and there's a couple of law firms that are saying basically stuff it, and they've agreed to forego to accept whatever financial penalties might be imposed on them just to do the right thing. As individuals, however, we're not universities, and we're as individuals, we're not law firms. We're individuals who make private decisions to be brave or not to be brave. And here I come back like a broken record to what I keep saying, is that the best way to find courage is to figure out what's meaningful for yourself. Now, if I worked for one of those law firms that didn't cave, or if I worked for Harvard or the universities that don't cave, and I was a trustee of one of those places or a partner, I'd have to look deep at what motivated me. Because if what was motivating me was money, then I would cave. I mean, the pressures from the White House are just too extreme. But if, on the other hand, I looked deep into myself or what meaning of my life was, and I found that the meaning of my life was operating with integrity, was being of service, was defending democracy. If those things were important to me, then I would become a lot more courageous. And like I think I may have said half an hour ago, what seemed horrendous difficulties become speed bumps. What to do becomes obvious because it's meaningful. So the big answer to your question is, like I say, I become a broken record. Is to look at what makes your life meaningful. If in fact you're still stuck on money and power, then God help you. You're not going to get very far. But if you finally discover that what makes your life meaningful is giving back, is not maximizing third quarter earnings, but trying to solve
Right.
problems. And I'm always telling people that giving back and service does not mean becoming Mother Teresa, does not mean joining the nonprofit world. No, no. You can be of service as a business person, as an entrepreneur, for example, making a good product, selling it for a fair price under good labor conditions, with respect for the environment, and as a good neighbor in the communities where you're operating. These are all service, and they're important services to keep our economy going. So I keep telling people, and I talk to lots of business audiences. I don't much like to talk to the converted because they don't need me, but I talk to a lot of business audiences, and when I've got their attention, I'll tell them that. I says, yeah, I mean, I'm here to tell you to be of service, but I'm not saying sackcloth and ashes. I'm saying being of service right
Right.
are. I talked to lots of entrepreneurs, for example, and some of them are doing incredible work. And some of it is directly related to traditional nonprofit causes. For example, like new technologies to provide safe drinking water for wells in some poor African country. Terrific. But also, some entrepreneur might be doing something that just helps people in terms of, I don't know, record keeping, communication, whatever, AI stuff, you know? So we all look for service. And what's important is to take stock of who you are. What skills do you have? What resources do you have? What contacts do you have? I mean, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why an eagle has claws. I mean, there's a reason why you have what you have. So you take stock of who are, and then you look deep into your soul for that source of meaning, and you put the two together. I have these qualities. I'm terrific at math, for example, so maybe the service for you is something to do with high technology or whatever. Or I've always been a great artist or whatever. Well, then this being of service for you then is using your art talents to create, I don't know, terrific murals for your community or whatever. And you take stock of your skills and then you apply that to the meaning you're seeking for. And that's I don't think it's that complicated, but it's not easy. It's not easy.
Right. Just have
And
to figure it out. Yeah.
God knows there are setbacks. I mean, these 2,000 stories of Giraffe Heroes, I haven't got them all memorized, of course, but a lot of these Giraffe Heroes, they've been fired, for example. Whistleblowers, for example, they've been fired. They've lost their jobs. They've lost money. A few of them have even lost their lives because
Wow.
the risks were physical. They get back up and they keep on going. And that's what makes them Giraffe Heroes. And it's true for all of us. We've dealt with now 2,000 people, but there are 200 million people out there that we haven't discovered yet who are sticking their necks out. And we'll tell as many stories as we can, all sticking their necks out to make their world a better place. And we talk to them not in any smarmy way. We talk to them very frankly. And some of the books I've written, for example, are how-to books about how to be a social and political activist without getting your head chopped off.
Hmm.
I've even written chapters on creating demonstrations, for example, or legal action against some bastards that are making life difficult in your town, or whatever. Because you need to fight, and sometimes finding meaning means putting up a fight. So you need to be prepared to do that.
Well, you, outside of the Giraffe Project and all of your other adventures, one thing that I found that was really neat when I was researching you was that you climbed the North Wall of Denali, which has never been climbed again. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I kind of glossed over that, didn't I? But I
Yeah,
talked about
question about it.
I talked about my mountain climbing. Yeah, my pictures in some climbing record books. The North Wall of Denali is taller, top to bottom, is taller than anything on Mount Everest. It's
Wow.
probably the most difficult and dangerous mountain wall on the planet.
My dad did climb to the base camp of Mount Everest for his 60th birthday. He
Okay for
climbed to
him.
the base camp of
Yeah.
Everest. Yeah.
Anyway, no one had ever climbed this before because it was too friggin' dangerous. I mean, it was swept by
Yeah.
avalanches. And so in 1963, I was with 6 other guys from the Harvard Mountaineering Club, and we were determined to do it. And we were 20 years old and indestructible and all that. And we recognized the danger of the avalanches, but we figured we could dodge them. And it was difficult because that climb took over a month. It took over a month.
Wow.
It was a sheer wall going from 7,000 feet to 20,000 feet. What's that? 13,000 feet up. Off the steep mountain wall, ice and rock and steep snow, avalanches coming down. But the avalanches all bounced off to the left or they bounced off to the right. We kept going. Sure, it was dangerous. A lot of rock. I mean, I remember early on in the climb, I was with another guy, Dave Roberts, who became one of America's premier adventure writers.
Wow.
Dave and I had climbed up on the first small section of the climb, and we had mistakenly put our tent too close to a rock wall, and we had woken up, and David left the tent first, and I looked up and I saw 2 small holes drilled. Like I heard a clicking, which was rocks coming off the 700 cliff right next to us. We shouldn't have put the tent there, but we did. And then the clicking got louder, and then so I dove out of the tent, and there was this whole bunch of rocks, this huge rock fall, and
Wow.
some of them now as big as basketballs, and they were heading right for me. I mean, Dave had managed to find some safety behind a rock buttress about 30, 40 feet away, but I didn't have time. In seconds, this huge mass of rocks would be coming right at me, and I couldn't run, so I just stood there, and the rocks went right through me. In effect, I mean, they're so close, I felt I could even see the veins of quartz or whatever in the rocks, all but parting my hair. And I just stood there, and every one of these rocks, even the small ones, missed me. I just stood.
Wow. My
David,
gosh.
in one of his books, Dave wrote it was the damnedest thing he'd ever seen. Anyway, So that climb was really dangerous. That wasn't the only. I can tell all kinds of stories. Oh, by the way, there's I've just created a picture book, an electronic picture book. What do you call them? A flip book, I guess. And it's almost.
Yeah,
And it's called Denali Diary, and I'll have it up on my website, which is johngraham.org, and it's great because it's got all these pictures in it and all these wild tales of adventure on Denali. But it took us over a
I
month,
love it.
and we dodged the avalanches, and we got to the top, and then went over to the other side and came down the safe side. And it's never been. Some people tried to do it about 10 years later, and they hardly started the climb before one of them got killed, and that was the end of that attempt. And no one's even attempted it since, and it's widely regarded as just too insanely dangerous,
Wow.
suicidal to attempt. But we
So
were
what made you just choose that to climb? Just random.
in those years. It wasn't all this highfalutin stuff about meaning and service. It wasn't that at all. I was 20 years old. It was all this
Yeah.
stuff about adventure and because at that point I'd already met Roy on the ship, and I had experience with the French Legionnaires, and I already wanted to be John Wayne. So all this was like, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on, bring it on.
Keep
And
on going.
and we also have felt the same way. The idea of death or serious injury never occurred to us. And all seven of us
Right.
went up and down this mountain without a scratch, without a scratch. It was like unbelievable.
Wow.
So that climb is one of the most, now becoming one of the most famous climbs in North American mountaineering. Yeah, it was difficult, but mostly it was just insanely dangerous.
Yeah, it seems that way. Was there at any point that you guys thought you were going to turn back?
No, no. It's interesting because, I mean, first of all, when you get up halfway up an icy cliff, it's just as dangerous to go down as it is to go up. So
Yeah.
we kept going, and there were there were innumerable close calls, people falling in crevasses and being held with the ropes. But the big avalanches missed us, and the weather was pretty good, although right near the top, only 1,000 feet from the summit, we got hit with a 4-day storm. But
Wow.
our tents held up, and we just huddled down in the tents. Interestingly enough, because we were huddled in the tent and in the middle of a storm, bush pilots flying by the north side of the mountain saw our tracks heading up from our base camp, and our tracks disappearing into avalanche debris, and then no sign of us above that. So
Right.
they mistakenly said we had been swept away with an avalanche, while at the same time we were 5,000 feet higher than that, huddled in our tents, completely invisible because of the storm. So there was, and some people will still remember that. I'll bet some of your viewers, listeners will remember this. There were headlines on newspapers all over the country about Harvard mountaineers vanish, feared dead on mountain, etc., etc. So when we did come back down, it's funny because before we headed up, we'd stopped off at the McKinley Park Hotel, which was the last bit of civilization
Okay.
before the road went out to the point where we had to start packing in. So the manager of the McKinley Park Hotel, who was not a very nice guy, he was so convinced that what we were doing was suicidal, he said he would buy us all the steak dinners we could eat if we came back alive.
Okay.
We're coming back. We have another last near miss call crossing the McKinley River, where I step on a hole that everybody else had missed, and I almost drown when I'm tied to a rope to a guy on the far bank, but I start pulling him in too. And the question is that if both of us are pulled in, there's nothing to stop us from being thrown all the way out to the ocean. I mean, it was just this rushing river. We should never have tried to cross at high water, but we remember that manager and his stakes. We should have waited for 10 hours. We should have waited till low water because mountain rivers like the McKinley River, which was what that river was, the McKinley River. Mountain rivers ebb and flow depending on when the sun hits the glaciers on the mountain that feeds them. So
Okay.
we should have waited for low water, but we didn't. All we could think of was those stakes. So we go across at exactly the wrong time. I almost drowned, but obviously I don't. And so we drive down to the McKinley Park Hotel. Now, mind you, the whole world thinks we're dead. So
Yeah, I'm
we
sure.
walked into the McKinley Park Hotel. It's been 38 days since we were last there, and
Oh my gosh.
we're sunburned and bearded and dirty we clump in there in our climbing clothes and demand our steaks. And people were falling out of their chairs because we were supposed
Demand your steaks. You deserve them for sure. I hope that they were the best steaks that you've ever had.
to meal. Was that ever a meal? Yeah, right.
My
That's
goodness.
that adventure ended. Oh boy,
I
yeah.
love that.
There's a lot more adventure stories, but I mean, it's enough. I've told them enough. I'm more interested now about getting people really interested in the Giraffe Heroes Project and what Ann Medlock and I are doing at giraffe.org. Oh, yeah. I have written a memoir. Its title is Quest, Quest.
Okay.
The subtitle is Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. And you can get that off Amazon, or you can get your local bookstore to order it for you. I like it because it's a very honest book. I determined to be completely honest in writing it. So I'm very honest, especially about the first part of my life, which was that descent into
Yeah.
selfish adventuring and the price I paid for it and the recognitions in Vietnam that finally led me to a different life and the struggles I had to climb out of that hole into something where could become a decent human being. Yeah, I mean, there are times in writing that book when I just started crying. It was just so tough. But it's a good book because it is so honest. People tell me it's well written. Then anyway, so there's that book. For sure, tune into the TikTok channel, Badass Grand.
Yeah. I will definitely link that all for you, for
Yeah,
everyone.
the
I need to
episode.
follow it too.
Yeah, the
I
episodes are
don't
only
know.
2 minutes, so you can look at them.
Yeah.
And
It's awesome.
my future stuff now, because things are so bad now, I'm getting more and more political. We didn't do that in this broadcast. That wasn't our purpose. But I'm getting more and more political, urging people to take action, create a backbone to the resistance to some of the excesses going on now, the firings, some of the foreign policy stuff, and all the rest of it. It's a real threat, I think, to our democracy, and we need to do something about it. And that means each individual person making that personal decision. What's meaningful to you? Is democracy meaningful to you? Well, then you better be prepared to fight for it.
I love that. Yeah, it's important for everybody to, that's the one thing that people share a lot of stuff on social media, but I'm like, what are you actually doing to make a difference, whether it's in your community, national level? I think it's really important for people to do more than just like share it on their story.
Absolutely. I mean, you're a teacher, right? I mean, for on every profession, especially teaching, where you have the hearts and minds of young people in your hands, so to speak. And on the other hand, they have their damn cell phones, which are competing for your attention.
Yes. Try
So
to keep them away as much as possible in my classes. The kids are pretty good with it this year, though. So thankfully, I'm like, keep it away, keep it away.
yeah, well, whatever. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that someone like you is a teacher because you have a great
Thank
chance
you.
to influence a lot of people away from the stuff where cell phones will intercede, where kids get to this false view of who they are. My wife and I finished watching a series called Adolescent,
Oh,
which
yeah, I started watching that.
yeah, it's getting a rave reviews, and it's all
Right.
what life is like for young people in this case in England, and about the tremendous pressures they're under because of their use of cell phones. And the
It's
young
really
man,
hard.
the anti-hero, the young man is totally consumed with the fact that he's worthless because he's been cyberbullied relentlessly and thinks he's ugly and worthless when obviously he isn't. So he gets involved in the story, but I mean, he gets involved in some pretty bad stuff, and a lot of it is led by a school culture which is completely controlled by cell phone bullying. Anyway, I
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John, you have told us so many stories. I can't wait to go watch all your TikToks after we get off of this and learn more about you. But I think that is going to be where we end. You are truly living proof that bravery doesn't always look like a headline or a medal. It looks like consistency, heart, and the choice to keep showing up, even when the mountain feels impossible. Whether John is climbing actual ice walls or helping people rise in their own communities, he reminds us that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the action in the face of it. If you want to learn more about the Giraffe Heroes Project, check out the links in the show notes, which I will have. And if this episode stirred something in you, share it with someone who needs that nudge to take the next bold step. As always, thank you for spending this time with us on the Running Y Mom. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review if you loved it, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. You can follow me on Instagram at the Running Y Mom _. And John, can you remind the listeners where they can find you?
I'm on LinkedIn a lot. I'm on Facebook, John Graham, and my email is graham@giraffe.org. I still have take some time every week to answer all my quote fan mail, and I'm eager to do that. So that's where to find me personally. I mean, the website is johngraham.org.
Yeah, and I will link all of that. Thank you, John, for coming on. I really appreciate you coming on and telling your stories.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I had fun, and I hope this was interesting to your audience.
Oh, it definitely was. So thank you to the audience for joining us today. Remember, you are strong, you are capable, and you are all amazing. Until next time, keep running, keep sipping, and keep embracing the joy of life. Cheers, and I will be back next Tuesday.